And we're live. Wonderful. Welcome, Kelly Hungerford. As you can see, Kelly's kind of half in the dark. It's like 19th century lighting, as we were discussing earlier. We need one more candle, which was Anton's funny comment of the day. The reason for that is not Kelly's fault. It's all my fault. I didn't actually completely be clear about the fact that there was video. So thank you, Kelly, for making the effort to leap on board very late in the day. Welcome. I'll give you the song. A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Kelly Hungerford.
And many more.
Brilliant. Okay, I feel like I'm in the 21st century, you're in the 19th century, and we're going to talk about moving into the digital age for B2B businesses, which is beautiful. I actually, before we start, I always start off with knowledge panels and brand SERPs, and I pulled up your brand SERP earlier on, and you absolutely dominate it. I thought it might be because you're the only Kelly Hungerford in the world, but you're not. There are at least 7 others, one of whom is a swimmer. No, not a swimmer, sorry, a water polo player who hardly gets a look in. You got your Twitter boxes. That's beautiful. You're obviously active on Twitter, and the podcast gets its image down there at the bottom. But basically, your brand SERP is actually really, really good. So I think probably without really knowing it, you've done a brilliant work on your brand SERP. Your knowledge panel, however, is less good, and your knowledge panel is only in the context of Kalicube Tuesdays. And that image over there on the right is the beautiful illustration that means this is a knowledge graph, a knowledge panel, excuse me. So delighted to have you here with that very short comment about
Yeah, thanks for asking me to join.
And Kelly is actually very 21st century. We had a chat the other day about taking B2B businesses into the digital world. And I mean, we can start with that. I mean, your initial story was saying it's surprising how many B2B businesses just don't have a clue that there is one.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. And I kind of want to say, I think my very 19th century backdrop here is kind of representative of the brands that I work with. They might be industry leaders, but digital laggards, and also just a little bit not yet in the 21st century, one could say, I suppose, digitally. So I think this atmosphere, it lends, and it was all intended.
Brilliant, absolutely wonderful. And is the question about that is the bigger the company, the bigger the problem, or smaller companies being more agile about moving to digital?
I don't know. I think it's industry related. So I've worked with a lot of companies in tech, and tech seems to be just they embrace, especially B2C. We know they embrace the technology more, but even if you're in tech industry B2B, you're probably a little more digitally savvy. I find that a lot of the more manufacturers, let's say you're in industrial goods or manufacturing, kind of that mid enterprise, mid-size enterprise, they're probably torn between both worlds. I mean, they're very set in the way they have been selling. Okay, so let's put that in context. Pre-COVID, they were a little more set, and I think the urgency, although we read all of this great research by Forrester, by Gartner, by, it's out there, it's really hard to swing management if they have also been in the organization 25 years, right? I mean, and that's the leadership there. They've been doing things a certain way. It's hard to swing them. And I think COVID-19, for just that alone, we would never wish this upon anybody, of course, but it really has accelerated what's taken 5 to 7 years in the past. People were forging through in 5 months, 7 months. So I think it's very industry related and almost size of the industry related. And I find the mid-size enterprise is often very sandwiched. They're not small enough to be really truly agile and act more like a startup. And they also don't have that mass of resource that the large enterprise has. So they're somehow straddling and maybe sometimes struggling in between.
Brilliant. I kind of think, I mean, now talking to you, I mean, let's say there are 192,464 B2B businesses in the world. Of those, let's say 10,000 have actually made a decent transformation into digital. And the thing is, because we're in the digital industry, we tend to see those a lot. So we get this kind of skewed view. And I mean, as a digital marketer, I'm just going, that's absolutely boatloads of clients for me. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's I think that you've hit on something, that we work in this industry, so we take the that's it. There's the number.
Thank you, Anton. Yeah, brilliant.
We don't need to go any further. Now, I think it's we have to remember that, and I think also as a consultant, I was a marketing consultant before I joined the brand I'm at now, Sunstar, the company. And I think we get very self-absorbed into this world of digital, and we all talk the same talk. We circulate in the same networks. We know each other, and it's very comfortable. And the minute you step outside that sphere, people have no idea what you're talking about. So I mean, we have to be really careful also, because we're making a lot more assumptions because of the content we read, the events we attend, that everybody is doing this. And if you work in marketing or you work in digital or IT in an industry, that this is bread and butter, and it's not at all, because they're completely absorbed in their world of making, ensuring supply chain works and their products are distributed and their new product development is working. And the digital, somehow, if it hasn't been really adopted and really there's this injection coming in from top leadership, they're completely isolated from the other world. So the question is, like, how do you break through and where do you begin, right?
But I mean, what struck me about the companies I talk to is, I mean, I'm starting with Kalicube, the Kalicube platform, which I'm now going to boast about. We talked about it the other day. It's in beta, and the idea here is to say, right, we need to sort out what the world says about you and what you've put out there. And when I talk to businesses, even tech-savvy businesses, you say, who created that page on Crunchbase? Who's looking after Google My Business? And they go, oh, somebody ages ago must have done that, and I've got no idea who it might have been, and I don't know what email address they use. And this, for Kalicube, is going to be one of the biggest problems, is nobody knows in a company who actually created all this stuff. So actually going and correcting it is a big problem. And a lot of the reason for that is that there is nobody within this business who has the responsibility of that digital footprint. Is that something you think is going to get easier, or am I going to struggle for the next 10 years?
You might retire struggling.
Oh no. And I'm already quite old. Yeah.
Of course it's getting better. No, I think you bring up a great point, and that's also an opportunity, and we talked about this as well, right? This decentralization and maybe, but going to the point of who's going to own it. So I think more and more, from what I'm seeing, more and more people are saying, okay, sometimes the step and that first footprint into, let's say, larger transformative initiatives is a lot of data gathering. So it starts right there. And if there's one person who is also just tasked with, we need to understand our footprint. And that's where I started with Sunstar. What's our footprint? It was, finding a big Excel with all of the different microsites. What are all the different social media? Where are we in Wikipedia? Are we in Wikipedia? Not only for the product brands, but for the corporate brand. And I think that that's exactly where it starts. And so the knowledge graph and what you're talking about, what your company is doing, is really important. And I think it is a segue in. Maybe you can also reverse engineer it, saying we can help you find where you are, because an organization, they truly do not know.
Well, I'm sorry. In fact, that's what I'm doing. That's what the tool does. You're calling it reverse engineering. For me, it's just engineering the reverse anyway. And it actually just collects all these references. And you were saying we've got this Google spreadsheet or Excel sheet, and I realised actually I now have 3 wonderful employees as of 3 weeks ago, and realised how phenomenally difficult it is to compile this information. They're doing it in Google Sheets, then we move it to the database. But somebody has to do it, and it's really boring, and it's actually very difficult from a perspective of saying, I have a Crunchbase page that talks about, for example, the company. No, it's supposed to talk about the company, but it actually talks about the products. And so we're talking about the wrong entity on the wrong page, and we need to go through all of that and start to correct it. And we were talking about your company, which is phenomenally complicated because it's fragmented. How do you decentralized is the word you use?
Decentralized, yes, I like that word.
How can you possibly deal with that?
Yeah, it's difficult. So, and I think that that is an opportunity also. And so if someone's talking about where do we begin and all this, and I think that transformation begins very often in marketing because we're so close to the customer. So it's a very logical place. You know, just either put a team member or get a consultant to pull together, make that giant Excel, and of course get in contact with Jason. You know, shameless. No, but I mean, really, because that's a starting point. That's a conversation point where you can say, you can go back to your management and say, guys and gals, I mean, look at this. We have over 275 different entities out there representing us, and none of them are connected. And when management sees that literally in an Excel, they're like, what? Like, nobody thinks of this. So sometimes these steps start in the very smallest of ways, which is just the beginning. That's where we start. You know, you have to have a base. And I think that it's a great place to start, and that's where we started with Sunstar. So Sunstar is it's this fabulous company. It's been around for almost 100 years. It started in 1932, and in Europe and in the U.S., they're primarily in the oral care business. So they have other industries. They have a consumer and an engineering industry, and then 4 different business units really, but I represent the consumer group's good and consumer business, and oral care is my main area, and that's exactly where we began. And it was very difficult because Sunstar, they've grown through, and it's a great approach. And again, a lot of mid-sized enterprises take this route. It's very decentralized. You have a very lean headquarters, and then you push down to regions and say, you have the product, you have the, you know, pay royalties, however that's financed, you go, right? It's launch and go. And that worked for decades. And now we're to a point where when we talk about customer experience, we talk about brand growth, digital brand. What does that mean today? You have to be centralized somehow. And this decentralization, I think, is really interesting, where we need that decentralized approach, and each market has its entity. And that's where it's great if you can show up in that, you know, when someone Googles and there you have your box on the right-hand side saying this is exactly how you are. But to get there, you kind of need to have an overarching vision, and you still need someone who owns that Excel with all of these digital properties, right? And it's not easy, because I think rarely we'll find somebody who owns all of that in an organization, because there's too many silos. But what we can do is we can have a really loud voice internally, and we can advocate, and we can just be curious learners, and we can be connectors. And so I think a lot of it today in building that transformative blueprint, it's just all about the connecting, right? And just going out and saying, I have this project, can you help me? Do you know who's responsible for this? Do you know? And along the way, you gather, like, you know, who's responsible for opening that YouTube account in 2007? Who's you know? And so you find a lot of issues along the way, but 4 months later, you have a really comprehensive, and that's about how long it takes, or took. It's about 4 months to get that comprehensive Excel, where then you can do something with it. And but it's interesting, because I don't know a company to date, anyone who says, I have a full view on everything that's out there, and I can tell you who the owner is. Pretty tough.
Yeah, okay. Unless it's a one-person company, in which case it's all my fault in my case.
That Anton put out there. Yes, true.
But that gives me two. Oh, we're ranking number 1 on YouTube. We always rank number 1 for somebody's name while we're online, which is lovely. That gives me kind of, right, point number 1 is saying, sorry, multiple points. Number 1 is, who is going to own this? And you're saying the marketers should probably own it. Number 2 is finding who currently has control of all this information, so that you can start bringing them together and talking to them about what is the strategy, and not just like all these kind of fragmented tactics. And the third is to build up an understanding of what it is we offer and how it's all related to each other. Basically what WordLift are calling internal knowledge graphs. Saying, and you're basically trying to build an internal knowledge graph and then say, this is what we have, this is what we're trying to present, now how do we go about it? And you think that's a marketing job?
Well, I think it's, I mean, I guess it depends on the company. I mean, what I found, and this was something that they could teach us better in school, I think, if you study business or marketing or communication, is when they show you that organogram of how an organization looks, we don't know which organization that belongs to, because I've never found an organization that looks like the organogram. That's for sure. So I think where I say marketing, I mean, I think it's a very obvious place to start, because marketeers and sales, they're so close to the customer. B2B,
Right.
the end users. I mean, they have the most vetted, they have their ear to the ground, they should. And I think it's a really logical place to start. You could maybe say, we want to do this from supply chain and start it out there. But if we're really talking about the brand presence and trying to reach, these growth goals, and I think, household penetration, if you're, it starts in marketing. And I do see, though, that it's a real combination. Marketers, we can't maneuver alone. I mean, I think marketing and IT today are just completely joined at the hip in some ways. I mean, as marketers, we try to move independently from IT, and we have the technologies and the platforms that allow us to do that. Codeless, it's fantastic. But IT carries so much heritage within the organization. Even if you can run 80% independent of them, let's say, they still carry so much background to markets and who set up this, because very often they're at the core of who's going to do it. We don't know. Throw it to IT. So while IT may not own it, they very often have their fingers in it of getting it going.
So if you don't know who created that Crunchbase profile, go and ask the IT department.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I think another area that we don't often think, I mean, PR, if you have a PR department, human resources. I find often human resources, they're just tasked with, can you own this? Like, it's kind of like the departments that nobody knows specifically what to do with. There were a few departments people tried to tuck it up under, right? So it's interesting that way, but it's a lot of investigation. And what is interesting about this process, when you go through it to try to map, your product brands and then map up to the parent brand, is you learn a lot about the organization, and you learn a lot about what you don't know. And we always think that we know quite a bit, but when you start asking the questions like, I didn't even know that, and I didn't know that either, and we have contributors there. So it's a great investigative process that I think we all need to go to. And it's certainly, I don't think it's something that should be outsourced to an intern. While they can kind of gather that data and report it back, a lot of the data and a lot of the knowledge that you're acquiring through that process, you want that sitting with someone who's going to stay in the organization.
No, absolutely brilliant. I kind of that tendency to throw things at interns. I mean, I've seen it in the companies I work with and for, and it's deeply frustrating, because they move on, and then you have the same problem again, that nobody actually knows what's going on. And I find that you not only have the problem of deciding or figuring out who created which profile, who actually knows what, and how the whole thing is organized, but also what are our entities? What is this company that owns that company, that's the CEO of that company and the CEO of the other company, and how's it all joined together? And I find, as you said, it's a learning experience when you start to say, where are the entities and what role does that entity play within the entire organization? You don't sleep at night, because it's really complicated really fast. And you said 250 entities within your organization, possibly more.
Yeah, I mean, so I've only just started, like, what do you call it? Breaking ground. Yes. So I started our transformative initiative, and that was really to re-platform all of these microsites and build a cohesive presence, one face to the European market. And we uncovered a lot of different, just kind of like the International Space Station, built, flung out to space for everyone to enjoy, microsites here and there, and gosh knows what. One just popped up last week from Italy. Oops, oh God, this is still in our analytics. It's like, the thing is like dead for like 2 years. Like, how is that possible, right? So things are popping up, and slowly you start to centralize the information. But yeah, I mean, I think when you work with highly decentralized organizations and they're really functional for moving fast, and that really promotes agility in the market, then the downside of that, or the challenge, is that you really have to work hard to keep an overview of information, an informational overview, not just of your product brands and more specifically sites and social media profiles. You need a really strong governance put in place to help that decentralization. And so I think that one of the biggest parts that I see in trying to move forward these larger scale, multi-year transformative initiatives is that you have to get everyone on board to centralize. You have to centralize to decentralize. So if you start from a really decentralized organization and you want to make impact 7 years down the road, one of the first steps is really going to be to centralize certain functions. And that goes across, data, technology, content, really so many different areas. And it's a little bit painful in the beginning, but that's the way that you start to learn about the organization also. And, we took a regional approach. We started with Europe. Now we're working with the Americas. Maybe the next step is, after that is APAC. But you have to take it kind of region by region. Otherwise, it's also, it's just not achievable. I mean, I think it's just overwhelming. And even a regional approach seems overwhelming for some. But yeah. I think the flip side of that in these initiatives is you have to think big and you have to dream big. Nobody's going to go through the pain of anything, be it a content audit, be it gathering Excels for what, to get just one little pat on the back. I mean, you want to see the glory, right? Otherwise, we're not going to go through the effort. And I think with transformation, it's the same thing. We have to put pretty big visions and pretty big dreams out there and go big, or you can't get people to hop on board. Because it's like, I don't know. It's like if someone tells you to go run 7 miles and you're going to get a goodie after. I mean, if they're going to give me a carrot, I am so not going for those 7 miles. But if it's like a big banana split, like that's my dream, I'm all over it. And I think transformation is the same thing. You got to have that big banana split at the end. Otherwise,
digital transformation is all about big banana splits. Right.
Oh,
the question there is, obviously, this is a phenomenal amount of work, a great deal of investment, very costly. How can you possibly convince the C-level employees, the people who run this stuff, that it's worth the investment? They're just going, we're doing okay as it is, and why would I invest all this time and effort in something that I can't actually measure?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one, and that still comes up. And there's not the measurement and the ROI is really tough. But but again, I think it's that dream. I think it's the vision. And it's also not so much of why should we invest? What are we missing out on if we don't invest? I mean, what's the cost of not investing?
And that's kind of very difficult. What's the cost of not investing is a very difficult sell, because it's really difficult. Unless you're competent, the only thing I found is say, look at what the competition is doing. And that kind of like jealousy of your competition or envy of your competition is a driver. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think what you look at too is, and I think a very pragmatic approach is saying, okay, if we're talking about Europe and we take the population of each market, and then what is our population of potential customers and consumers in that market, and you start breaking it down and say, what is our reach now, one to many with what we have today? How can we reach? What percentage of that potential population in our segmentation are we reaching? And what could we potentially reach if we were really leveraging our strategy on social media, if we really had, email marketing automation in place? And so I think you have to work little by little that way. We worked very much on if we had websites and could secure X amount of traffic a year, and we made assumptions that maybe a B2B website has 5% conversion, and a B2C website has 3% conversion. And we worked out the mathematics saying potentially we could reach X amount of conversions. And if we put $1 attributed, $1 to that, or €1, whatever that sale is, then you can start building a picture saying, maybe this is how digital could potentially impact sales. Awareness. I mean, I think those are the conversations where you have to start building the business models around them also, and make a lot of assumptions. I mean, when you're starting from nothing, that's all you can do. And usually, or often in B2B, you might not have commerce on site. So you're working through distributors, or you're working through affiliates in the markets, and we're a headquarters function. So we fund this, but how do we show that it's paying off? And I think that's really, it's an evolution, but you have to start somewhere. And when you're starting from nothing, then you can make some very basic assumptions and show. And a lot of times it is as simple as saying, let's measure what we can, and let's show how we're going to attribute $1 to that figure or a sale, order, and then see where we go. If we're trending in the right direction, the dollar figure at the end of the day doesn't matter as much as the trend itself. And I think that it's very pragmatic. And then you can break that down into each individual market, saying, over time we can show how we're starting to chip away and attract those. We're gaining traction with those segments that are important to us in the market. So.
And I think that's the key point, is chipping away, and you got to bear in mind that it's step by step, chipping away little by little, and this thing just doesn't happen overnight. And a lot of people think, oh, it's digital or it's online, therefore it's going to be incredibly quick and it's going to have immense success tomorrow.
Where the success comes from, I think, Jason, I think the success comes from showing that your organization is moving forward as a team. I think we put a lot of effort and maybe overemphasis on ching ching, what's like in my pocketbook. And I'm not sure if that's the only way to measure success, right? So we worked a lot on what if our teams could work better together? What if we could use technology while we're reaching these sales goals and, of course, pushing forth growth? But we need to also focus on how our teams are evolving. What's the employee experience? Are we able to better leverage assets today and maybe produce once, create once and use over many different markets instead of having each market create? So there are a lot of different ways to measure success. And I think really important along the road is always having those milestones and being able to show, every 3 months, how have we achieved? Like what have we done? Because very often, like you said, these are long-term initiatives. I mean, this initiative for Sunstar, and we called it Achieve. The planning started in 2017. And finally, really at the end of 2019, we were able to say, okay, we have achieved. I think in 2020, we're like, okay, we're done now. Everybody, like, adoption is there. Nobody disputes any more digital. I mean, pandemic took care of that. So we can close that door.
Sorry,
right?
if I can pick you up on one point there, you said, okay, 2 years to get everybody on board, we've done it. And what you're saying is not we've finished the transformation, it's we've got everybody on board so they're not arguing about it anymore. And it took us 2 years.
Absolutely. Huge point. That's a really good point, because really we started in 2016 with, hey, we think we have a problem. I mean, we know that back at that point, I think in 2013, Walker had that report, by 2020, customer experience will be more important than price, right? That was a big statement. And so I used that going in 2016 saying, look, everyone, 2020 is just around the corner. And these are the facts. This is what B2B decision makers are saying, that customer experience, the price and your product, really, the quality is not even going to matter. What's the experience that you give your customers along that journey? And everyone was like, are you nuts? And I was like, maybe. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? But that's what the data says. So let's follow it. And it was a really long process, because it involves people. This is, I think, what we forget too. It's like, you said it. Oh, we have the technology. It's boom, boom, fast. You know what? People love progress, but they hate change. How do you motivate change in the organization? And that's been so fascinating. And I think that's my passion point I love technology. I mean, I'm definitely a marketeer. I love the technology part and seeing how that enables, but you don't have that enablement unless you really hone in on the people part. And that is the trickiest part of transformation. We do hate change.
But we love progress. I mean, it sounds like something. It sounds like something Mark Twain would have said. People, something. It sounds like a quote from Mark Twain, but it's not. It's a quote from Kelly Hungerford. Is that correct?
But it's true, and it's and I think So that length. It's just. I mean, we spent. I'm counting now. A year and a half solid just in planning, in setting the mindset of change is coming. I would say adapt or die. The train is coming through, either like hop on or get hit. I mean, it was like these very graphic visual, kind of scare tactics in a way. But it was trying to get people to understand that, you can resist it, but you'll just get plowed over. I mean, it's coming. The ship has left the harbor. It's set sail. But you have to really help people. You have to have a heart and help them ease into everything that's coming at them. Because if you're talking about a traditional company that has very little capabilities in-house to manage a digital ecosystem, maybe everything's been outsourced. Maybe you're very distributed and decentralized across the region. You have to imagine you have to build all of those skills and motivate and excite people in-house to take this all on top of their daily job.
Right. I mean, the first thing, as you said, you've got to get them to stop arguing and resisting. Then you've got to get them enthusiastic. Then you can get them to do the work. And then you can start to think you're going to make progress.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I was going to retire before anything happened with my company, same could be said for you, is that you're looking at 10 years of work to even get the company to a point where you say, yes, this is a digitized company.
Absolutely. And it's been, so I've been working with Sunstar since 2016. I joined them in 2020 as the head of digital transformation for the consumer group. And it's, I mean, it's a journey there because you focus on the departments that are related. So marketing communications, IT you need in there. And then you start branching out. There might be the product, the brand managers in there. Then maybe scientific affairs starts coming in and PR, but there's still a whole slew of people who they're not yet really touched by the transformation, so to speak. I mean, you're putting pressure on supply chain, PR is understanding. So it really takes a long time for this to seep out. And that's been 5 years now. And I would say, you know, in Europe, the broader base, they're on board, you know, they're like, what's next? And now we're working on sales and marketing alignment. So it's not just the transformation of how we market, but now it's how do sales and marketing work together? And after COVID also, it was like, wow, how can we do better? How can we better help our sales teams? Right. But then again, you need to take a step back and say, do we have everything in place, right? Like there are all these players that we don't talk about a lot. In digital transformation or digital at all, when do you hear people talking about outside of web analytics, who's responsible for your data? Do you have a master data specialist? People are like, no, who is that, right? And so important because how can you have systems talk to one another without understanding how the data talks to one another? You need that governed, you need toolkits. I mean, and there are things that pop up that organizations, everyone's like, what is that? Like, how do we go about that, right? And they've been managing somehow in their own silo, but these transformative initiatives are all about, the silos will always remain. We need them for organizational structure, but you have to work cross siloed, like really in this matrix. And that's super new for people. I mean, you're sharing all the time with people. You think, why do they need to know this, right? And that's the beauty of digital. It's like good food brings us around the table and hopefully like brings us back for more, right? But it's,
and with digital, the potential for sharing these assets and this information becomes much bigger, which leads me then to the question, what about information overload? I mean, if you're sharing all this information, you're pushing it across all these silos. All of a sudden, I'm sitting in my little silo and I'm going, I only had like 10 pieces of information last week, and now I'm getting 100 and I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, shut down.
Yeah, but I mean, there needs to be...
Calendar. I'm very busy for the next 5 years. No, I think in the beginning so I've learned that you have to over communicate for anything to just reasonably sink in. And then at some point people say, oh yeah, I've heard that. Or sometimes people need to hear it for a year and a half and they say, I finally get it. Clicks now, right? Finally it clicks. So I don't think that we can over communicate. I think what happens at some point, people will be more like, I think I've got it. And do you mind if I don't attend anymore? No, that's great. I love it when people say, I'm declining your invite. I don't need it. I'm good. Fantastic. Right. So I think people learn how to self-regulate and you need to know where it fits in. But in the beginning, it is a lot of kind of kumbaya. I mean, everyone's around the table and we're ensuring that the knowledge is out there for people at every touch point to get it. And one thing that I've learned along this process, which I'd never thought about before, but it worked really well, is, you know, we have a tendency as like visual people and marketers to change up our slide decks all the time. Like we always want to, one slide deck, it's like this, and I would hate to show that same deck again to somebody else. When you're really trying to bring change home, you want things to feel very comfortable. So I reused slides and decks, I don't know, 200, 300 times probably. They see the same slides over and over. And then you add maybe another bullet point or you introduce a new slide. But I found for people, when we're trying to make them comfortable with change, that there's comfort in knowing like, oh yeah, I've seen that slide, it's not new. And that helps with that overload, right? because it's all, oh yeah, we've seen that before. Okay, blaze through. And then you can get through that part faster, but you also go back, but remember, we're here. This is why we're doing this. This slide here, and then, going down.
But I mean, this sounds like school teaching all of a sudden, because we've got that thing is that at school we did see things a lot, and I would sit at the back of the class throwing pieces of paper at other kids in the class, thinking I've seen this 5 or 6 times. But the fact that I saw it for the 5th or 6th time and I was now getting bored means that I understood it, which is the point.
That's a good point. I didn't think of it that way, but it's absolutely the same thing. I think we are educators. I think as marketers and professionals and trying to convince people. So, if we go back to how do you convince investment, you educate. I think people are leery of not investing, and they'll call it a cost and not an investment and what have you, because they don't understand. They just maybe see a number on the paper and, oh, that's expensive.
Sorry, excuse me, which brings me, to the point, and I'm going to stick with the educational idea, is like, let's say I've got a PhD and I could teach university students, but I'm actually trying to teach kids at primary school. There's no point in telling them everything I know in all the detail with all the complicated words. I need to bring them to understand what it is they need to understand at the stage they are at in their transformative process, from, let's say, digital marketing or digital transformation primary school to digital transformation doctorate. Is that fair?
You are so right. That is absolutely.
I like
absolutely.
you.
Yeah,
you're making me sound like I've got really good questions.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think that's a great point, because so years ago, I remember, I don't know, I was talking to, I don't know if you know Matt Collier. He has blog chat, and he's been around on Twitter with chats, and he's a content creator. He has he's accrued a great amount of content. Great guy, super smart writer. And I remember when I was working at a company and I asked him, I just said, man, I am not getting across. Like, I don't get it. Yeah. And I don't get why they don't get it. And he just said, because you're talking over their heads. He said, you're giving them 201 content and they're at 101 still. Think of education. He said, the other thing he said was, if you sound too smart in front of people, if you put yourself there and you're trying to share what you know, but if it's above the classroom's head, nobody's going to ask questions. Nobody's going to feel comfortable. You're going to have silence the whole time, because nobody wants to admit they have no idea what you're talking about. So just keep it simple and keep it at that base level. And I've taken that with me over years. I don't know, I think he said that like 10 years ago or something. And I always remember that, and I don't always achieve it, because sometimes I, get all excited and I blurt it all out, and then people are like, oh, what are you talking about? But I think it's a really good principle to live by. And it's like, you have to give everyone, you have to make them feel comfortable and not assume that everybody knows what you're talking about or that they're at the same level. So you have to build that level yourself. And I guess teachers do a really good job at that, right? I mean, that's and I'm not a teacher. So we are. I'm not in the classroom.
Well, 100%. I mean, that's a really beautiful way to end this. Just the idea that we need to be empathetic to the level of the audience we're speaking to. We need to bring them through to what they need to understand for this digital transformation, step by step, little block by little block, chip by chip. That was brilliant, Kelly. Absolutely delightful. Quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Kelly.
Oh, that was so nice. That was so fun. Now I can go back to grinding my meal and, turn on the lights. No.
Brilliant. And for the audience, thank you very much. That was amazing, Kelly. You were awesome. For the audience, thank you for watching. Got a couple of comments in there. Anton, thank you for the backroom messaging thingies that you were doing. Next week, it's Pina Unsal. How to tackle cultural differences in digital marketing. She's delightful. She's super smart. And I'm really looking forward to that one too. So thank you, and see you.